Hello world, it's Nostalgia Tash and you're listening to Nostalgia Tash Watches Disney Plus films. This week's theme is animal doctors. Now I know what you're thinking, animal doctors are obviously veterinarians, but none of the protagonists in these films actually have any sort of veterinary credentials, so I've just broadly labeled them animal doctors. And you'll see why when we talk about the films. So the films that we're going to be talking about today are You Lucky Dog from 1998, Dr. Dolittle, also from 1998, and Dr. Dolittle 2 from 2001. Again, the Dr. Dolittle franchise, I think more films have been added to Disney Plus, but at the time there was just the two. So we tacked the You Lucky Dog in there as well. Speaking of You Lucky Dog, this film is actually the second Disney Channel original movie ever, which I didn't realize until doing research after watching this film that it was a Disney Channel original movie. Most of my nostalgic relations to Disney Channel original movies is kind of more around like the 2000s, early 2000s, mid 2000s. That's sort of my DCOM renaissance, if you will. So anyway, the synopsis for You Lucky Dog is that Jack Morgan is a dog psychologist who had a psychic connection with his dog as a child. This connection had long disappeared until Mr. Windsor brings his dog Lucky to Jack's office to inquire about why Lucky is depressed. Sometime later, Calvin Bridges, Mr. Windsor's driver, approaches Jack to tell him that Mr. Windsor had died and that he needs to come to the estate. At the estate, Mr. Windsor's spoiled blood relatives, Lyle, Margaret, and Reuben, find out that they will be getting none of Mr. Windsor's inheritance and that it will all be going to Lucky, with Jack as the account trustee. Lyle, Margaret, and Reuben then spend the rest of the movie trying to get their hands back on the inheritance through various means to try and prove that Jack is mentally unfit to have control over the fortune. So the main sort of crux of this film is exploring the relationship between Jack and Lucky. When Jack first realizes that he's kind of developing this psychic connection again, he kind of freaks out. And at first you don't kind of understand why. You're like, okay, cool. Like, you've done this before. I don't know what you're so scared about. But it turns out that in addition to psychic connection and being able to sort of read Lucky's mind, he also channels Lucky. So what that means is whenever Lucky gets too excited, it like transfers over into Jack, and Jack basically turns into Lucky. So he basically acts like full dog mode and then can verbalize Lucky's thoughts in this kind of channeling dog mode. So the majority of this film and what Mr. Windsor's blood relatives use as a defense to get Jack thrown out of being the trustee of this fortune is these like channeling shenanigans. So it happens first at the estate, then when they're out shopping in the food court. It happens again when the Windsors take Jack and Lucky to court. Yeah, which is a little bit of a stretch. You know, like psychic connection is one thing, and then this channeling, sort of even the pseudoscience to try to understand how that happens, like doesn't make any sense, and they don't try to have it make any sense. It's just really a plot device to move the story forward, and it works, and it provides, you know, some silly shenanigans. Speaking of these channeling episodes, so the main one that I thought was really funny actually was the very first one when Jack moves into the Windsor estate and Lucky gets excited for whatever reason. And the maids that work at the Windsor estate are very concerned about Jack and how he's behaving, so they actually pick up and leave. And so they're creeping out of the house, and they say to him, this quote made me chuckle, "I just wanted to let you know that we're leaving now. It's nothing personal, but I think you might be possessed by the devil or something, so we're just gonna go now." Which, yeah, made me chuckle. Another incident happens at the mall in the food court. But leading up to that moment, because Lucky obviously gets to spend this fortune, they decide they're going to go to the mall, and Lucky wants to go furniture shopping. And so he needs to test out all of the furniture that he's buying. And I'm almost positive that regular mall, even not even furniture store, but regular malls in general, wouldn't just let this dog trounce around and walk like he owns the place. Because obviously there's like service dogs and stuff, but Lucky is showing no indication of being a service dog, anything like that. He's just doing his thing. And I'm pretty sure they would have kicked him out sooner than later, but because, suspension of disbelief, this is movie logic, it was fine. To be fair, the furniture salesman almost kicked them out until Lucky bought like 15 pieces of furniture. So they were like, oh, he spends money, so he can sit on as many furniture pieces as he wants. So talking about the greedy Windsor siblings, I don't know if he's the youngest, but he's sort of meant to be like the less intelligent of the three of them, Reuben Windsor. He's played by Taylor Negron, who I think anytime I've seen him in a movie or a TV show, I've loved the characters that he plays. He is most famous in my brain for being Manuelo the Manny in Mary-Kate and Ashley's So Little Time. But apparently, I didn't know this until I started again looking into the film, that Taylor Negron passed away in 2015 of liver cancer at age 58. Which was a bummer to find out because, like I said, I love him as an actor. He always plays, the kind of quirky bit side characters, and I think he does a really good job at that. So Reuben, along with the other two family members, Lyle and Margaret, first go to this sleazy lawyer to try to get some support to get Jack and Lucky kicked out of this inheritance will. And initially the lawyer wants 30%. So the family is like, no, we're going to go try to sort this out themselves. Obviously, hilarity ensues because they're not very good at sorting things out. They go back to the lawyer. Now the lawyer wants 50%, but they end up taking Jack and Lucky to court. And you sort of find out via flashbacks that Lucky blames himself for the death of Mr. Windsor. The flashback scene is that Lucky really wants to go for a walk and the weather's really terrible, and Mr. Windsor's like, no, Lucky, like the weather's terrible outside. But Lucky insists, and so Mr. Windsor takes him out for a walk, and during the walk, Mr. Windsor drops dead. So I think Lucky sort of puts the connection together. But you find out later on in this court scene that before Mr. Windsor and him have this interaction, Lucky sees Lyle put something in Mr. Windsor's drink. And what he puts in his drink comes in this bottle specifically labeled in big bold capital letters, poison. So the audience knows what's going on, but apparently Lucky can't read. So he's like, there was this powder, like what was it? And of course, because Jack channels him, he can kind of interpret all of that. But anyway, I just thought that was really funny how, you can just buy big old bottles of poison to, I guess, presumably kill your family members. I was chatting to my partner about this, and he was like, oh, maybe because it's a Disney film, they didn't want to put the specific name of any kind of poison because they thought maybe that would, like, influence kids to go look all that information up or something like that. But again, this was the end of the 90s, so I don't know how accessible that different information would have been anyway. And maybe we're reading into it too much, but yeah, I thought it was really funny that you could just buy bottles of poison. The movie ends with, spoiler, well, I've already spoiled it for you, but Lucky and Jack still continue to live in the Windsor house all happily ever after, and Lucky actually buys all the animals at the pet shop. So while they're at the mall, they're at the pet shop, and there's all these animals there, and Lucky doesn't kind of quite understand what the situation is. Once he figures out that he can buy them, he did. And so now they all live happily ever after in this sort of like dog animal sanctuary mansion situation. So yeah, it was a very cute film. Apparently, Lucky was played by Bogus, which I thought was a funny name for a dog. So now on to the IMDb facts. I had previously mentioned that it is the second Disney Channel original movie to exist. I didn't look up what the first one is, but I'm sure we'll come across it in our rewatch together. This is also apparently the final live-action appearance of Christine Cavanaugh, who plays Bernice the secretary in the film. So Bernice Cavanaugh retired from acting on screen after this, but then continued to do voice roles until 2003, before she unfortunately passed away December 22nd, 2014 at the age of 51. They don't really specify. There's no indication of sort of the circumstances surrounding her death. So that name maybe doesn't sound familiar to you, but she has voiced some pretty iconic characters. So she's actually the voice of Dexter in Dexter's Laboratory and Chucky from Rugrats, Chucky Finster. And she plays a bunch of other characters as well, but it's really interesting. It's really worth looking into her filmography to see who else she voices and who else you recognize. So I always appreciate that sometimes there's these actors and actresses that you don't recognize by name or even by face, but you definitely recognize their voice, which is very cool. So now on to some information about our main actors and actresses. So Jack and Allison's the attorney for the Windsor estate, are played by Kirk Cameron and Chelsea Noble. And they're actually married in real life and have 6 kids. And Kirk Cameron is an interesting character. We'll get into him in a second. So both of them together founded Camp Firefly, which provides sponsored camping trips to terminally ill children and their families. And Kirk, I'm assuming Chelsea as well, is a devout evangelical Christian to the point where he has co-founded the Way of the Master ministry with Ray Comfort, who is another evangelical Christian. So Kirk has gone down the religion rabbit hole, I think similar to some of the other actors that we've talked about previously, but he has full hog into this particular sect of Christianity. Apparently, him and Ray Comfort proposed the concept of the crocoduck as a way to disprove the theory of evolution. I wish I was making this up, but you can Google crocoduck and figure out why its existence, theoretically conceptualized by these two, disproves the theory of evolution. Spoiler alert, it doesn't, but they try. In addition, I don't know if you've read the news. I'm sure you have. I'm sure everybody's been doom scrolling this last year especially, and this year. But Kirk Cameron is that person who was holding a bunch of mass maskless gatherings, most notably doing some Christmas caroling and prayer groups in opposition to the public health guidance about COVID. He doesn't quite trust the origins of COVID. Again, he was the one who, I'm sure, I don't know if you come across the headlines, was former child star turned televangelist, hosts multiple anti-maskless gatherings in protest to the public health guidelines, that sort of thing. Which sucks. Because, as much as I, again, don't want to yuck your yum, it's cool when you find something that you are very passionate about and that speaks to you on a level and you would like to share a message. But, again, I don't like when it gets too preachy, and I especially don't like when your system of beliefs and your way of life is then used to put other people's health in danger. Not a fan. But like I had mentioned, the two of them founded Camp Firefly together. But when I did research onto the website, it's a little preachy. I'll read one of the quotes from the website. So it says, Camp Firefly is designed to bring laughter back into the lives of burdened families. Makes sense. For husbands to see their wives as the sweetheart they married. For wives to fall in love with their husbands again. For kids from all families, sick and well, to have fun and connect with each other, finding hope for the future by drawing strengths from God and one another. And I guess when you boil it down, it's basically parents of chronically ill children, probably the chronic illness consumes the family, that's all, their whole life, things like that. But I thought it was very interesting that they felt the need to slide in the specific sentences about husbands and wives. But I guess in the context of, God and unity and family togetherness, that foundation between husband and wife is the thing that they promote the most. But anyway, yes. So Kirk Cameron is kind of a jerk face in my brain, which sucks because I actually really enjoyed this movie. So I don't know how you feel about watching films starring problematic people. That's something that I kind of struggle to reconcile within myself. And yeah, I think that's all I have about that. So we'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will dive into Dr. Dolittle from 1998, which is the Eddie Murphy version. And we're back. So the next film that we're going to be discussing is Dr. Dolittle. Now, I know Dr. Dolittle sort of has had many iterations. Most recently, I think last year, was one with Dolittle starring Robert Downey Jr., I think. But anyway, this is the one that I actually am most familiar with, which is the one starring Eddie Murphy. So our synopsis is, John Dolittle spends his childhood talking to animals, but an incident in his childhood suppresses that talent. Fast forward, John is now a successful people doctor, coordinating a buyout for his medical practice, guaranteed to line his pockets, but potentially sacrifice his integrity. He's also a husband and father with 2 daughters, one of which, Maya, shows the same curiosity for animals that John did as a kid. After nearly hitting a dog with his car, John's ability to talk to animals reappears. Though hesitant at first, John eventually embraces his talent, and it reinvigorates his passion for caring for patients over profit. Now, I completely forgot about this whole medical practice buyout plot in the film, but yes, that's sort of the main battle that's going on with him before he sort of comes to terms and accepts his talent for talking with animals and all that kind of stuff. So, my favorite bit of probably the whole film, there's a few kind of really classic, interesting bits, but I think my absolute favorite one is, so John's 2 daughters, Maya is played by Kyla Pratt, and Charisse, who's played by Raven-Symoné. So Charisse I guess John gets home from a long day at work or whatever, and Charisse decides that she's going to change her name to Paprika. Not Paprika Dolittle, just Paprika. And John's like, what the hell is that all about? And his wife is like, oh, like Salt and Pepper. So I love the image of Salt and Pepper and then the youth recruit Paprika going on tour and doing stuff together. And then at one point, because they all go to camp, and you can see her practicing her moves, and she's wearing stereotypical 90s cheesy R&B wear, and she has her big P logo on her neck because she's Paprika now. And that it's very quick, and if you miss, I love these one-liners that if you're not fully paying attention, you just completely miss, and they end up being some of the best moments of the entire film. Some other quotes that, again, you might kind of miss. And to be fair, I was actually quite surprised to hear it in a Disney Plus film. But one of the main pivotal animals that John takes care of and sort of helps him come to terms with his desire to help animals and people is this tiger. And the tiger is very depressed because he's dealing with these kind of medical issues that nobody can sort of figure out what's going on. So John gets called to him because the tiger is on top of a building and he wants to jump. So John has to go up and try to convince the tiger that, I will help you, and if you still kind of feel depressed afterwards, we'll go from there, but I need you to come down off this ledge. But there's these 2 rats at the bottom of this tower that are little jerk faces. And while the tiger's, contemplating jumping off this building, the rats yell at him, "Jump, you big pussy." And I get that they're talking about a tiger, but I think I'm just so used to having that term overly policed in pop culture and things like that, where I guess because of the context, they were able to sort of slip that in as a double entendre, because I know as well that term was also used to describe, especially in the 90s, I don't know if they still do it now, is to describe a weak person or you're a big baby. I remember hearing that if you were to it's like the cruder version of calling somebody a chicken, I guess. So they did that within the film, and I was actually, again, if you're not paying attention, you might miss it, and I was quite surprised to see that just get slipped through. And also, actually, when you turn on the subtitles, they put that, they spell it out in the subtitles as well. So I was quite, I guess, pleasantly surprised, but also kind of confused. But again, I think it's because of the context in which the word is said. Another quote, another blink and you miss it. I guess they say it more frequently, so you probably wouldn't miss this one. at the sort of pivotal moment, the tiger, they steal the tiger. The tiger is a circus tiger. And when John sort of starts to figure out what he's going to do to help the tiger, they have to steal him from the circus, and they bring him to the medical practice. And of course, now the circus owner gets the police involved. In order to stop the police from going into the medical practice, a bunch of animals band together and essentially like stand outside the medical practice and prevent the police officers from going in. And all of the animals are yelling, "Pigs, go home! Pigs, go home!" And at one point, there's like an actual pig that starts walking away, and the pigeon's like, no, man, not you. So again, another like play on words of things that could mean animals, but also colloquially mean other things in other contexts. So they do a few of those kind of double entendre animal, but not animal references in the film. So in addition to these like clever words or quotes and stuff, there is a little bit of, trigger warning, a little bit of like transphobia in the film, which I find has happened or does happen in films of this time period. So at one point, obviously, people find out that John can talk to animals. They think he's crazy. So they have him institutionalized in a mental health institution. And it's run by his former classmate in medical school. And John is trying to convince him to let him out, discharge him early. He doesn't talk to animals anymore. But you can tell that like character kind of has a bit of a thorn in his side about him, and is like, no, like I don't think I believe you. I'm gonna make you stay for the rest of the month. And then Eddie Murphy's character, John, goes, well, if you sign my release form, then I won't tell fellow doctors about the little pink tutu you keep in your closet with the thong back. And then, of course, he's like, oh, I gotta make sure that he doesn't talk about this, and so he lets him go. Which is really, it's a very cheap joke, because it's meant to imply that, you know, men who maybe like to wear more stereotypically flamboyant clothes is seen as something to make fun of and something to joke about. And I think especially in the last few years, or at least hopefully, there's been a lot of movement to de-gender fashion and de-gender clothing, and also that kind of dispelling that level of shame around things that you like to wear and things that you don't like to wear. And so I wasn't a fan of this. I thought it was a very cheap joke and it was inappropriate, and I hope that I don't see as much of this in some of the newer films. And I hope I don't see it in the older films either, but just a little information about that for you. Some questions that I had. If anything, basically one main question that I have is, after John helps this owl, because they're camping, he helps this owl out, and then of course he's still freaking out, so they all go home, whatever. I guess the owl blabs to the other animals that like there's this guy who can talk to animals and he's a doctor, isn't that amazing, you should go see him. And his family, I think they live in San Francisco, wherever the Golden Gate Bridge is, that's where they live. And they live in this really nice like penthouse apartment situation, and in the evening when everyone's in bed, all of these animals end up in John's apartment wanting assistance, so he spends the whole evening basically delivering medical advice to these animals. And first question is, how did all of these animals get up into the apartment in the first place? Because I assume there's like a doorman, there's lifts. You know, how do they navigate that? And then just have not alert the whole building that there's animals roaming around the hallways. And then second question is, how come no one in the family woke up during this time? At one point, Charisse needs to go to the bathroom, and there's this weird exchange where she's like, Dad, I need to pee. But he's trying to get all the animals out so that she doesn't see them. But then theoretically, once she's done doing that, she goes straight back to bed. And I'm pretty sure that all of these barnyards of animals hanging out in the house would have woken people up. I say that, but I also know that I'm a very heavy sleeper. So maybe a barnyard full of animals wouldn't have woken me up either. But I still have questions about how realistic that would have been. Again, I'm talking about realism in films that are solely unrealistic. But come on, I'm trying to ground things in reality to make unrealistic things more believable. Whatever. Anyway. So yeah, that's kind of the main thing. At one point, because John's dad really was against this ability for John to talk to animals when he was a kid, he even got like a reverend to come and try to exorcise John, because I guess being able to talk to animals was like a devil thing. But at the end of the film, you can overhear John's dad talking to Maya about how being able to embrace your weird, quirky talents is a good thing, and that, you know, it's okay to be different and your talents that might be weird or special and blah, 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 and basically like reconciles because John's overhearing this to sort of be like, I'm sorry that I made you forget how to talk to animals and you should embrace that now. So yes, very nice film, very enjoyable. Now, very cool facts in the credits is that because in addition to obviously live animals being involved in this production, there were certain circumstances that didn't allow that, or certain stunts, things like that. So they also used obviously live animals, CGI, and they used puppets as well, so the animatronic puppets. And for this film, the Jim Henson Creature Shop did the animatronics for the film, which is very cool. In addition to just like the creation of the creatures and things like that, I love the individual titles in the credits for the different, I guess, departments of the creature creation. So they had feather and hair technicians, which I thought was very cool. If your like entire job in like the animatronic world is just to realistically apply feathers or realistically apply hair. I'm sure it's a very skilled job, and I think it probably takes a lot of skill and a lot of practice to be able to make it seem realistic. The other thing that I like, especially with this film and with the sequel, is that the credit titles, there's like your generic animal trainers. And then depending on whether the animals come from different organizations or different companies or are more involved, so there's generic animal trainers, and then there's specifically in this film horse trainers and tiger trainers, because I think the horse is like semi more involved than some of the animals, but the tiger definitely has the biggest role in the film. And therefore, I don't know, not therefore but it just happens to have specific groups of trainers. So we'll talk a little bit more about the animatronic CGI breakdown in the IMDb trivia. But first bits of IMDb trivia that we're going to move to. The character of Dr. Dolittle is actually created by author Hugo Lofting. So this is actually a character that he wrote a series of books about, but it's I think they also, again, there's previous movie iterations. I'm not sure about TV, but definitely previous movie iterations before this Dolittle film, and obviously post interpretations of it as well. But in this movie specifically, I guess very few elements from the original Dr. Dolittle films or books were used in this film. There was a few notable exceptions. So John's stay in the psychiatric facility, John giving a horse glasses made of magnifying glasses, and the push me pull you in the background at the circus, which I think is a random kind of like ode to the original, probably because it's not referenced or utilized in the movie at all, but it's just kind of there. Another fact is that apparently Eddie Murphy is terrified of live animals, which is interesting considering that he did 2 movies involving lots of live animals. He insisted that as many as possible be superimposed digitally in the scenes. When he couldn't avoid acting in the same room as the animals, the shots frequently ended with Murphy screaming. So now getting into the more technological behind-the-scenes stuff of the movie. Apparently one of the newest technological innovations, 2D imaging, was used to create the illusions that the animals are actually talking. So the animals are filmed moving their mouths naturally, and in post-production, the movements are manipulated frame by frame to make it seem as if the animal is forming words with its own teeth, lips, and tongue. Apparently this differs from the imaging done in the film Babe. So that movie was from 1995, where all the animals' mouths were done in 3D imaging. So for Babe, the computer-generated mouths were superimposed on the animal actors. So that was the most advanced technology of the time of filming that one. But now, or I guess I'm sure even post, there's probably more advanced stuff now, but within the context of this film in the late 90s, the 2D imaging was the most advanced technology at the time. So I would assume if you would watch Babe and then watch this film, you could see the difference between 3D imaging in post and 2D imaging in post. So many of the scenes called for animal doubles. So Rodney is the name of the guinea pig. He rides on top of a moving vehicle, and he has like a misstep in the ladies' room where he almost drowned. So in those scenes specifically, an animatronic guinea pig was used, made by Jim Henson Creature Shop. Rodney was well trained and did many of the behaviors to his credit. So he did do a lot of his own stunts, but in scenes that were considered dangerous or too technically advanced, maybe for certain animals, they then would use like the animatronics or the post-production stuff. Other animals which had specially designed matching animatronic doubles included Lucky, the dog, the 2 rats, the owl, Jacob, which is the name of the tiger, and the pigeons. They also had multiple live doubles, allowing them to be rotated and rested often. Last sort of behind the scenes animal fact is that for a variety of reasons, mostly for predator-prey situations, or for scenes where animals appear to be in a dangerous place, like the tiger on a ledge, a blue screen technique is used. The animals are individually filmed against a blue background, and then during editing, their image is superimposed into the desired setting. Similarly, the animals or animal and the animatronic double can be separately filmed in the same environment, and then during post-production, they put the two halves seamlessly together to look like they're in the same room. And a lot of these tips, tricks, techniques are also used in the sequel as well. So I didn't include as many of them in our IMDb facts section because it was a lot of repetition. One of the things that I actually enjoyed about the research for this one, there wasn't as much kind of interesting IMDb facts that I found in the just general trivia section. But in the goofs section, usually that's reserved for, especially in live films, when it's like, oh, you see the boom, stage right at this timestamp or whatever, and about like continuity errors and stuff like that. But one of the things that they included in this one was factual errors related to animal species or situations like that. So the two that I found the most interesting is when John and Jean, who's one of his medical counterparts, colleagues, they are operating on the tiger. The pulse is the same as a normal adult human. They hook them up to monitors and that's the pulse sound that they're using. Apparently a tiger's heart rate beats much more slowly. And at the end of the film, at the beginning of the film and then it ends at the end, Maya is taking care of this ostrich egg. So she's been incubating it, putting it under heat lamps, taking care of it, yada yada. And at the end of the film it hatches and it's actually a baby alligator and it's not an ostrich. And they're all like, ha ha ha, like that's so funny. But apparently an alligator's egg is not so large and it's soft and leathery, not hard. So it would be basically impossible for a baby alligator to be born in the specific egg that Maya was taking care of. But again, suspension of disbelief, this is a fictional film. So now we will take one last break before we dive into our Dr. Dolittle 2 sequel. And we're back. And now we're back in the Dr. Dolittle universe for Dr. Dolittle 2 from 2001. And our synopsis is John Dolittle is trying to balance being a human physician and a surgeon, animal doctor, and a family man. Feeling distance from his family, John tells his daughter Charisse that they will go on a family tour of Europe. But this plan is derailed when a beaver, he's like the mob beaver, asks John to save his forest home from a logging corporation. The Dolittles convince a judge to delay the deforestation project for a month so they can attempt to find a mate for Ava, an endangered Pacific Western bear, and repopulate the bear species in the area. But the only Pacific Western bear they can find is a circus bear in captivity named Archie, and the odds of him surviving back in the wild, let alone wooing Ava, are very slim. Can Dr. Dolittle rehabilitate Archie and save the forest? You watch the movie to find out. Spoiler, he does, but anyway. So this film was very enjoyable as well. It's different circumstances, so instead of medical practice learning kind of origin story, now John is full-blown animal whisperer, and he takes a stint as a conservationist. And in order to do that, like I had mentioned, they convince this judge, and the person who takes the case is Lisa Dolittle, so John's wife, because up until this point you don't know that she's actually a successful lawyer. So they work together to create this injunction. And while this is happening, their kids are growing up. I feel bad because I feel like Maya is kind of given the shaft in this film. She's not focused on a whole lot. The focus shifts to Raven. And I think that that's because Raven is sort of the up-and-coming star of Disney. She's sort of getting really famous. I think That's So Raven sort of was in the kind of middle of filming during this time and that kind of thing. So Raven's star is rising, and so I think the franchise took the opportunity to sort of focus more on her because they think that she would probably pull commercially more than Maya, played by Kyla Pratt, who I don't think was as sort of famous at the time. So, focusing more on Raven, they really sort of explore this disconnect between father and daughter because Raven's 16 now and she's growing up and she's cool. She has this boyfriend who's the Domino's delivery driver played by Lil Zane, and Raven is sort of hinting in ways that she's really embarrassed by her dad and really sort of embarrassed that, John can talk to animals and stuff. But then there's also sort of like, you don't know if she's doing like this weird 16-year-old girl deflection situation. But anyway, that's not the point. One of the parts that I didn't appreciate from this film is John is trying to talk to his daughter. I keep referring to it as Raven. Her name is Charisse, but it's just easier for me to call her Raven. So John's trying to contact Raven, but she's locked her door and she has her headphones on and she's dancing. So then John has to like break into the side of the house to try to get her attention or whatever. And so while he's trying to do that, obviously Raven is doing her thing. She's 16, she's listening to her headphones and she's dancing. And then once John finally gets her attention, he like busts in her room and is like, "What are you doing? You do all those like dance moves and stuff?" And she's like, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "That's not dancing, that's advertising," which is rude. We do not slut shame in this house of the pod. So yeah, there's some slut shaming going on in this movie, which I don't appreciate. But luckily, it only happens once. But I was still not happy to hear it happen. So I didn't like that. But moving on to the parts that I did like, when John is trying to introduce Ava to Archie, she's like, "Oh, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah." And John's really trying to sell Archie as this awesome man. And then Ava's like, "I don't talk to bear pimps, bye." Again, one of those one-liners that just like makes you chuckle. Another portion which was interesting, and it was funny, but at one point Archie is like really not having this whole trying to be a wildlife bear situation. He's Mr. Circus, he's kind of a star, built up in captivity. And so at one point John almost tries to do like a Scared Straight program with him, where he takes Archie to, I'm assuming it's a zoo, where these two bears are in essentially this cell. And the idea is to sort of like scare Archie to be like, the wildlife is amazing, look what your alternative is. And then they end up like really vibing and like singing some show tune together. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure, I don't think people do the Scared Straight program anymore. I think it's been totally proven to not be helpful. I think there was like a big study or something disproving how it actually was not helpful in deterring young people from committing crimes. But I think that program was still alive and well in the 90s, so I think that was sort of like a spoof of that situation, but it backfired on John. Another classy one-liner, which is sort of like, I think, capitalist sentiments in a nutshell, I guess. So it's getting to this point where animals around the world are protesting the deforestation of this particular forest, and the logging CEO man is like, "Oh, like, this is terrible. We can, we're still gonna stand our ground." And he's getting really angry, so he does his angry Republican capitalist little rant and says, "I took on the Democrats, I can take on a bunch of animals." Which I feel like it's still a thing now, but I don't know very much about American politics, but there does seem to be this overarching narrative when you have like a corporate person that they always spout off against the Democrats, like there's some socialist, communist thing that's gonna sort of, ruin the lives of the elite. So this sort of fits within that narrative. I think my favorite scene in this movie is when John is trying to teach Lucky and Archie about being an alpha male, because they think like that's what women want. Because not only is Archie trying to woo Ava, who's casually seeing Sunny, who's a Kodiak bear. So she has like this sort of He's sort of like a, excuse the language, but he's kind of like a fuck boy, a fuck bear. So that's who Ava's seeing. But anyway, so John's trying to teach Sunny and Archie, who is lusting after a wolf lady, how to be manly alpha animals. And they're trying to do that, and then I think Lisa interrupts asking John a question, and he's in like alpha man mode, and he accidentally barks orders at her and completely regrets it, because then she's like, "But excuse me? You can sleep on the couch, asshole." And that was just a really funny scene, because I was like, yeah, okay, cool, like, you talk the talk and the alpha dog is what you want, but, like, you actually don't mess with the wifey, you don't mess with the ladies. So, my personal relationship philosophy is more about, like, some equality balance and no sort of one person is the hierarchical leader of the couple. But anyway, that was still a very cute part. I think a few times throughout the film, John is realizing that he's sort of neglecting his wife. And especially while he's trying to teach Archie how to woo Ava, he's realizing that he hasn't tried to woo his wife in a very long time. And there's moments where he's attempting to do that, but the animals keep ruining it. So I think the situation was obviously reflecting back on to John that, you know, he doesn't quite know what moves to use anymore. But in the end, whatever they teach each other works out. There's a happy ending. At one point, John then acts as the mediator between the logging company and the animals to reach like a formal agreement because the animals all go on strike. It very much mirrors real kind of labor strike situations based on my little knowledge about them. So the film ends with a title card that states that the film is for Ellie. So I tried to do a bit of research to figure out who Ellie is, and I couldn't find anything from a credible source, which is annoying. I would like to know who Ellie is. Some nice little cameo voice acting is at the end of the film. Obviously, Archie and Ava get together and they give birth to 2 cubs, and there's a end credit scene where Archie is teaching his cubs like show tunes, like a whole kind of show performance, and the bear cubs are actually voiced by Mandy Moore and Frankie Muniz. So I got excited when I saw that those names were in the credits very briefly. And speaking of credits, they actually officially credited Archie. So Archie was played by Tank the bear, and the baby bears were played by Bart the bear and Honey Bump bear. And we'll talk a little bit more about them specifically in our IMDb facts. The animatronics in this film weren't done by the Jim Henson Creature Shop. They were done by Animated Engineering, Inc. And the credit titles that I appreciated were Bear Stunt Coordinator. And in this one, obviously you have your generic animal trainers, but for this film specifically, there were bear trainers, wolf trainers, and then inferno artists. And I can't remember how many, like I don't remember there being like explosions and stuff in the movie, but there was an inferno artist. So I wonder what that is. Now on to our IMDb facts. Like I had mentioned, Tank the bear was the bear who played Archie, and he is known as the second most famous bear actor. First is Bart the bear, who are both owned and trained by Doug Seuss, and Doug Seuss plays Klondike Dave in the film. So I was doing a bit of research, and Doug and his wife Lynn have been, I guess, adopting grizzly bears since the 70s or something. They started with Bart, who then went on to have all these acting credits, and Tank was then their second adoptee. And then there's Bart number 2 and Honey Bear Bump, which were the 2 cubs in Dolittle 2. But then they grow up and end up having acting credits of their own, or more acting credits of their own. Some of the acting credits that these 2 young cubs then have, they're actually a subject of 2 Animal Planet specials. I guess how they ended up in this film is that they were on the set of the time of filming, and the director of Dolittle just decided to add them in at the end just because they were there. I think that's like the equivalent of being accidentally discovered. You ever see those shows or those things, I guess trivia about actors or models where they're like, oh, they were discovered in a gas station parking lot? I think it was similar to these bears. They were just on the lot one day and the director was like, you have star potential, be in my movie. Also, there was a documentary narrated by Brad Pitt where all 4 of these bears starred in it, and it was about Doug and Lynn and their preservation of grizzly bear terrain work and their sort of animal charity stuff, specifically with bears. And the original Bart actually passed away during the filming of that documentary, which is unfortunate. And other, I guess, sort of Animal Planet related things. I found there was a show on, I think it was on the Discovery Channel, called like Man versus Grizzly or something. And these 3 bears, Tank, Honey Bump, and Bart 2, were competing against, I guess, very fit people in a series of challenges to see, I guess, who was the stronger, more agile, more mentally capable species. And then again, these Animal Planet documentaries and things like that. So they are in quite a few different sort of genres of film, these bears. Some other facts are that Smithy, a performance bear, has lots of scooter experience and was Archie's stunt double. So at one point when they first meet Archie, he is again a circus star, and the first time they see him, he's scooting across the stage on a little tricycle. And I guess Tank didn't perform that stunt. It was Smithy, who is a performance bear. So apparently the trainer placed the bear on a comfortable seat and cued the animal, and it happily rode across the stage while another trainer waited with a treat. A lot of the IMDb facts were again about how they filmed different scenes or how they had certain animals behave in different ways, and they really break down all of that. So there wasn't really anything new that wasn't kind of already broken down in the trivia for the first film. But this was an interesting fact. At one point, John tells Charisse that crickets are nature's thermometer, and you can tell the temperature by their chirping. According to the Farmer's Almanac, if you count the chirps for 14 seconds and then add 40 to that number, you will have the temperature in Fahrenheit. Count the chirps for 25 seconds, divide by 3, and then add 4 for the temperature in Canada. Or not in Canada, in Celsius, which is the temperature measurement we use in Canada. But yeah, so I guess that's a real thing. I would never, I don't know, I have no desire to attempt that, but if you do, let me know if it works, and that would be very interesting. Again, there is a lot of animal factual errors in this film, so I compiled some of them for you. There's a deer in the film that speaks in a female voice, but it has antlers, so technically it's a male. And then the opposite of this is when there's a beehive that Archie gets for Ava as a way to proclaim his love, and the bees attack, and all of the voices of the bees are male, but a hive is protected by its worker bees, and all the worker bees are female. Male bees never leave the hive, and they don't have stingers. So I guess there's some sort of factual inaccuracies in terms of which animal sex does what, has what going on. So I had mentioned before that Ava is casually dating this fuck bear, Sunny, and it said that he's a Kodiak bear, but that species is exclusive to Alaska, and this film takes place in California. Like, the forest is in California, so it's factually inaccurate that a Kodiak bear would be in that forest in the first place. Second last one, so the mob beaver, they call him God Beaver because he's meant to be like the godfather, offers John a fish when he first meets him, but beavers are herbivores, so they don't actually eat fish. So why he would have a stash just for guests, I don't know. And the final fact, or factual animal error, is that there's an animal that gets referenced as a weasel in the film, and he's like a little snitch, and he's trying to get info about the circumstances that kind of up the ante in this film. But the animal that they call out as a weasel is actually a ferret. Ferrets are a completely different species to weasels. And that is everything, I believe. Oh, I wanted to say that I found it very interesting that they pushed Raven to have a lot more of a major role in the second film. When they were gearing up for Maya in the first film as the character or the daughter of John who had the most interest in animals. So spoiler alert, at one point Raven discloses that she started being able to hear animals speak as well. And so it's like gearing up that, oh, she's going to take over the family legacy because she can also hear animals like John, and they're going to work together. But then there are 2 sequels. There's a Dr. Dolittle 3 and a Dr. Dolittle 4. and they both star Kyla Pratt as Maya, the youngest daughter, as the person who eventually takes over the sort of family animal business. Which makes sense in the context of the first film because, like I said, she's the one who has the most interest in animals. But then it doesn't make sense in the context of them gearing up Raven to be the one to carry on the legacy. And my theory is that the reason they gave her a big part in the second one is because she was the up-and-coming star that was going to draw them more attention to viewers. But then by the time they were conceptualizing and creating the Dr. Dolittle 3 and 4, she was too famous at that point. She had done like That's So Raven, Kim Possible, she was in other movies. And I just think that, especially like direct-to-DVD movies or direct-to-video movies, she was kind of too famous for that. And then that's when they went back to the original plan of sticking Maya in the legacy takeover position. That's my theory that is completely unfounded, but based on my own anecdotal research that I did into the situation. So, in conclusion, I actually enjoyed all three of these movies. I would recommend watching Lucky Dog, Dr. Dolittle, and Dr. Dolittle 2. The only thing I have a bit of reservation about is obviously how problematic I find Kirk Cameron to be. So I don't know if you're sort of in a similar vein to me, where when it comes to consuming content that contain problematic individuals, sort of how you feel about that. If you don't think about that or have that sort of internal battle that I do, then I guess that's irrelevant. And yes, you should watch all three films. But again, if you have that same sort of internal debate or discussion within yourself like I do, you might want to avoid You Lucky Dog. I'll put it in my recommendations anyway, but again, I'll leave that up to you to make that decision for yourself. Thank you guys so much again for listening. I hope you are enjoying the pods. If you have any suggestions or things, please do let me know. I do sort of have a companion content account on Instagram, so if you follow at NostalgiaTash, I usually post very niche memes about the films that I've watched and that are discussing on the podcast. So if you want a little bit of extra, I guess, if you want a different way of interacting with these films that I'm watching, that might be a good place to do that. And besides that, again, thank you so much, and I will see you guys next week. Okay, bye-bye!